So when I first transitioned over, I made a mistake that I think a lot of people make. And I just started adding in carbs on top of what my baseline diet was. Now, to be fair, I was trying to gain weight. I was really trying to gain weight because I had powerlifting aspirations and things like this. So at this point in time, my mentality was like, I just need to put weight on. So I was also trying to gain weight. But if I go back, and what I do with clients at this point, after going through the transition myself and also walking many people through the transition, what I do is I titrate carbs and fat ratios. So I'll bring fat down and I'll bring carbs up. And then protein, I'm usually putting that around 0.82 grams per pound per day if the person is lean, or 1 gram per pound of lean body mass if the person is obese. The reason why we're using 1 gram per pound with obesity is because if you do 0.82 grams per total body weight, you'll get a very high protein value. So you don't want to have your protein too high. We just want to have enough to maintain our lean tissue and allow us to build some more if we want to, without turning that protein into energy. So when I did it, I didn't do it correctly, but I also had a different intention. I wasn't trying to lose weight. I was really trying to put weight on because I was lifting. I was trying to put mass on. I was in college. But when I do this with people, what I do is I am titrating carb and protein or fat and carb intakes up and down based on the person's tolerance. Because there's something important to understand is when you are shifting off of low carb. I know it's a little bit tangential from intermittent fasting, so we'll get back to that in a second. But when we're shifting off of low carb, there's a transition that happens in the body where you have to be able to metabolically tolerate carbohydrate again, because you are in a state of physiologic insulin resistance because you are burning mostly fatty acids. The digestive tract has to adjust because you're primarily running on fatty acids. Maybe you kept fiber intake low. And then the microbiome also will have to shift when you start adding in some of these carb sources like starches and fruits, and also the intestine as well, because when you go on a low carb diet, the ability to absorb carbohydrate and with very low carbohydrate intakes actually decreases. And then when you introduce carbohydrates, the transporters in the intestine, GLUT5 and GLUT2, start to increase their activity, and then you start to be able to absorb carbohydrate again. Then the liver has to shift, the peripheral tissues have to shift, and then the fibers, these new types of fibers and starches going to the microbiome, will also shift the microbiome, because prior to that you're having protein, fat, and bile acids reaching into the colon a lot of times, which is why people can get diarrhea or constipation or some of these symptoms on low carb, keto, and carnivores because of the interaction with the microbiome and some of these different components. So you have to understand there is that transition. So I wouldn't say go from 0 to 60 on carbs, especially if you went low carb because you had metabolic issues, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, obesity. What I would say is slowly titrate. So I usually create a schedule for somebody. I'll figure out what their caloric target is, dial in their protein, and then adjust fat and carbs slowly over time in incremental steps to get them to this spot. And I'm also shifting the carb sources over time, because you don't want to start out the gate with a liter of orange juice. Well, you may have a problem with that if you just came from, I'm going to eat as much butter, eggs, and beef as I can, and I'm not going to have anything else. Right. Then when you start putting orange juice in the mix, it may be problematic. So you're probably going to want to start more with whole fruit and whole foods like potatoes, maybe some white rice, yams, cassava. Although starches, some people have to check their tolerance to starches, because the pure glucose can also spike blood sugar very fast. And you have the whole fruits like berries, whole oranges, bananas, things like this. Essentially, the fiber with the fruits will delay the absorption a bit and affect the blood glucose rise from some of those carbohydrates versus if you just have juice by itself. And it'll also help with some of the satiety components, because as you already alluded to, when you switch out of this low carb intermittent fasting setup and you start to introduce carbs, the carbohydrate effect on blood glucose, we can talk about smoothing out blood glucose, but also the effects on metabolism and insulin signaling on top of thyroid signaling, on top of the steroid signaling and leptin will shift, and an appetite will start to increase with that as well. And so you want to account for these things, because you're not going to go, I don't eat all day long until dinner and I have one meal and I'm good. When you start to add in carbs, depending on how you set up your meals, you're going to be hungry every 3 to 4 or 5 hours. And so those long fasting windows are going to be a little bit more difficult.
It is such a conundrum that people are in right now. And I can't tell you how many people contact me and say, I can't lose these 10 pounds that have just creeped up. And my diet is fasting, low carb. Fasting, low carb, I've got weight, don't know what to do. Because now they've restricted themselves down. They can't fast anymore. They can't eat any less. There's no more room to tweak to get that extra 5 to 10 pounds off. So they're freaking out because 5 years ago, they started this low carb diet, intermittent fasting, and they found out that if they had one piece of bread at the restaurant, the scale went up 3 pounds the next day, freaked them out. And so I love that you talk about the fact that it's a gradual process because the body's smart. It only strengthens the muscles that it uses. So if you don't have a need to break down and process carbohydrates in the gut, then it's going to get rid of all of the things that need to do that and focus on the things that need to break down the fats and the protein. So when you throw in that food that it hasn't seen for a year, there's going to be what's going on here? I need to change some things. So that's why you do things slowly and in a very specific way. So there is a method to this madness.